Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. Luke, what is up, man?
Hey, dude, you all right?
Yeah, man, I'm excited to catch up. It's been a running joke in the podcast for those that are listening weeks in a row. It's been like I film with Scott and then Nick and then you kind of all right in a row. It's like the international hub, but it's just me cheating to catch up with my friends. That's all it is. You know what I mean?
That's the wonderment of technology today.
So how have you been, man? It's been like 3 years since the pandemic podcast, and obviously we text back and forth and stuff. But like, what's new in your life?
Well, quite a lot. Guess we spoke the latter half of 2019, right?
Yep. Yep.
What's happened since then? Well, a lot. We qualified to Olympic Games. Olympic Games
Yep.
was cancelled, then it was back on, then it was postponed, then it was cancelled again, and then postponed.
Nothing crazy. Nothing crazy at all.
Yeah, so we eventually got there in the end, and that was an insane experience. It had all the emotions that one could imagine,
Sure.
and plus some more. And obviously it was during COVID times, and so that whole Olympic experience was, I think, very unique because of COVID.
Mm.
So everyone was so anxious to interact and to speak. You had to wear masks all the time. Anyone photographed without a mask, then I think we were outie. So
Yeah.
all of that went on. That had its own trials and tribulations within it, which I'm more than happy to speak about, because it was insane, that whole experience. And then obviously that was 2021. Then we went out to Worlds. That was crazy as well. There was a whole flipping insane situation that happened there, where the whole stadium was shut down for 2.5 hours as we were like about to march out into competition. So yeah, that was interesting. So I think that was about as many kicks to the chest as we could imagine. But then 2022 was super interesting. It was rocky. It was very rocky to start with. There was a lot of figuring things out, and we were applying some new methodology, and a new routine ultimately. And we learned the hard way that perhaps that wasn't the right choice, and that we should have perhaps stuck with what he's best at in terms of Rhys. And that paid off in the end, because he became world champion. So that was nice. That was a nice ending to a pretty hard year in and out of the gym. So it was nice, and I feel positive for 2023.
As you should be, man. As you should be, man.
An absolute wave of positivity that I just feel. My gut tells me there's some amazing things to happen. So yeah, it's exciting.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, let's come back a couple steps just to catch up. Is fun, but like on the Olympic situation is I'm the most curious on what is the sensation and the feeling like. So much of just, God, it's just so much prep work, man. It's so much work. And like, I'm a big believer that for every hour of polished work you see, there's 100 to 500 hours behind the scenes of grunt work in the dark that nobody sees. And I think it's so much more amplified in a sport like gymnastics, where it's probably thousands of hours, right, of Rhys's career, and you're learning and you're tweaking and you're trying. And what is that like to step out in that moment and be like, 10,000 hours has led to 2 minutes? You know what I mean? Like, what is that feeling like as a coach?
I mean, it is quite amazing. And I think sport has a beautiful way of teaching you life lessons. I think Oscar Wilde once wrote about how art imitates life, or life imitating art. I often attribute that to gymnastics, and I think gymnastics can really teach you some life lessons. But I mean, yeah, you know yourself. Quite often they talk about this iceberg, and you see the tip of the iceberg, and you don't see the 2 kilometers of iceberg. That's very much the case with gymnastics, particularly the sport of gymnastics, because you've got, you salute, you've got your one chance, So luckily, if you're very high caliber, you don't need to do your best work ever to make the top 8 for a final, or top 24 for an all-around final. For Rhys's situation for Olympics, he qualified in first position, which was the most outstanding thing to see, filled with pride. It was amazing when he put his hand up and he went through. And I remember he went to come down off the podium, and I put my hand out and I said, "Stop, stay there,
Yeah.
take this in, take
Yeah.
this in. We don't know if we'll ever get this again. We don't know what the future holds. Take this moment in, because I want to experience this as much as possible as well. Look around, absorb this energy. How do you feel? Write it down immediately, how you feel,
Yeah.
so you never forget this." Because there he was as a young guy. I think it was one day after his 21st birthday.
It's insane.
And he saluted, and he did a decent routine. It certainly wasn't his best routine of the program. That program was absolutely phenomenal for him. Like,
Mm.
he, yourself, programs rarely go to plan.
Oh yeah, no.
But this one did. He worked so hard and was so intricately working on conscious training, where everything was thought
Yeah.
of. Nothing was done without a thought. And that was both of us, me and him, because it was still pretty quiet, if I remember correctly. There wasn't anyone else in the building, so it was me and him, and we were just smashing training out, and we had this one vision of him performing a perfect routine, which he did very well in 2019 to do in that world final. That was an excellent example of what he can do. And then for qualifications, it went beautifully well. And then, of course, we had the final, and sometimes it doesn't always work out, and that's the case that we had. And it was very difficult that day. It was difficult because he didn't deserve that work that I was seeing day in, day out, and the focus, which I've never seen really anyone else do. Never mind a 21-year-old. I remember what I was like at 21. Now,
I was just gonna say I was a goon at 21, man.
I've always worked hard, but I mean, Rhys brought it to a new level, and he went up sheer handstand. I think it was just a little bit short, and so there was a slight rush in time, the pickup, and then his finger got caught on a one-handle loop, and that's it, done and done.
Pommels is so unforgiving, man.
Yeah, and it just felt, like a from Harry Potter, like a Dementor just sucking my our souls out, and it wasn't anything other than he didn't deserve that. That's all I just remember thinking and feeling was he didn't deserve that. Regardless of the outcome, he deserved a clean routine, because that's what he just did on every day for the last 8 weeks. He has not failed a routine. The only routine that he failed in that entire program was that one. And so that was really difficult for the for the both of us. We both felt he deserved more than that, and but you know what? It's those times that really test you. That was difficult, both mentally, in and out of the gym. You're questioning everything. What could have went different, and the answer is nothing. It was a perfect build up, and sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbled. So we can learn from. That's all we can try and do. So in terms of, was it psychology? Was it just the fact that it was the timing was slightly different because of that sheer handstand? We debriefed after debriefed, and do you know what? I'm confident that things are sorted in terms of he knows what he wants and how to get there now. And sometimes you just need to be right down at that bottom to figure that out. And as I recently said in a BBC documentary, that they've been filming Rhys all of last year, and they had a wonderful documentary that came out. I said sometimes the road to success has to be rocky, because maybe that's the only way to enjoy it. And so that's the way I'm framing it anyway, and I hope he is too, because he's had amazing success since then, and of course, being crowned world champion there recently is one of them.
Yeah, sure, right. And I think it's a challenging thing to kind of dig through the embers of maybe something as difficult as that. But man, there's a lot to harvest there. There's a lot to harvest there from productive things. And obviously, I don't know how long it lasts, but the first 24, 48, 72 hours is just very raw and very just like, there's no way around it. It hurts. It sucks. You don't want it to happen, as any bad thing in life is. But when you get a little bit past it and it settles, there's an enormous amount of, like I said, of knowledge to maybe be gained, or perspective to be gained. Even if it's not like you said, like it could have been absolutely fluke, could have been just the worst possible timing of something like that to happen. But there's still a lesson to be learned on your resolve and what you can do with that and how you treat that, right? And I'm curious. Obviously, you would know from your perspective more than Rhys's, which is once that initial kind of harsh wound phase starts to go is how do you approach that something like that? That's, some people would consider that one of the biggest, letdowns in sports that you could have. There's probably nothing more painful than an athlete who trains their whole life to get to that moment and then something stupid like that happens. How do you as a coach even wrap your head around opening that conversation and talking with someone to have that move forward,
I think initially you need to just let it be. I think too much interaction straight off, you're not going to get the response that is required in a situation like that. So one of the things I often say, good and bad, is just journal it straight away.
Yeah.
With as soon as you can, write that to paper. And there's pictures of Rhys and Eamon, the guy I coached down in Dublin as well, who's coming up really nicely on floor, and I get them to write it down straight away. There's pictures of Rhys in the competition hall 5 minutes after and on the floor in straddle fold, writing out how he feels, because I want to capture that emotion straight away, and then package that, and then maybe in a day or two write it again and see if that's changed. So for me, my process for good and bad is pretty much the same, that I let it just simmer there, let the gymnast figure that out, and as long as they've written it down, because there's so much happening all at once. And then I'll usually address it depending on how long we're out. So maybe we're there another week, or if finals haven't been hit, and then we got to have that real awkward, horrible week where we're out there for the duration and there's no final or whatever. But if we made the final, then we're usually leaving 24 hours or so after, and then I'll just allow a little bit of time at home with loved ones, and then we'll get down and we'll just I call it a truth train.
I love that.
I like to put humor into everything I can. I guess maybe it's just my way of dealing with things. But so I'll just kind of walk up and I'll go choo choo, and then they'll know, and they'll be like, all right, okay, the truth trains. But they'll kind of brace themselves a bit, and they'll sit down, and
that's incredible.
And that's just like, okay, we lay all cards out on the table. The only way this can work is if it is completely operated under truth. You say everything that you want to say, and I'll say everything I want to say, and hopefully we can come up with a solution. I've done that multiple times over the last year or two.
Yeah, and I love that thought process you have about, journaling. I think everybody has their medium, right? Some people need to verbally talk to somebody about it. Some people need to write it down. Some people have other methods. And I don't know whether it's a cathartic thing where you need to just get it out and vomit it onto something that's not the dome or whatever else it is. But I find sometimes there's this exercise that I teach athletes to do called 1 to burn, which is you take a piece of paper and you write down everything that's in your head, good, bad, in between. Because sometimes something in your head is so brutal or ruthless, you don't even want to admit that it's in there, and you write it down and you're almost embarrassed by it, not for a disappointment or whatever, but there's just stuff that we think about that's horrible sometimes. You're like, what is happening in my head? I'm so cruel to myself. So you promise that athlete that you're going to have 1 page to just vomit whatever's in there. No one's going to look at it, and you're going to literally light it on fire and you're going to burn it. So that's proof that the evidence is going away. And when you have an open medium where there's no judgment and there's nobody's going to see it and it's just you versus you, that's sometimes very, very powerful, because you can just get it on something that's not in your head. And I can think of many times long conversations with my family or friends or athletes where just getting it out allows the first layer. And then, like you said, you give it 24, 48 hours where you just go away and you don't even think about it. But when you revisit that 3 days later, you have a very different perspective on it, but you're able to very factually observe the situation because it's not that raw, flared up, emotion driven analysis. Right. And I think that sounds like what you're doing. And it's wonderful that we're starting here, because I think it's like criminally underrated and how helpful that can be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because obviously we can have some crazy irrational thoughts in our brain. And I remember, and yeah, it's really interesting. I remember on the plane journey home from Tokyo, I wrote down about 10 pages of my thoughts. I've never looked at it since. I can't look at it. I haven't been able to. Yeah, I know generally the general theme. So you've just reminded me. I completely forgot about it until just this moment. So
you don't have to do it now live during the podcast.
But yeah, again, it's character building ultimately. Under those times of extreme emotions, it really does build that character. And what was it? I heard somebody say something recently that diamonds, they're built with extreme pressure, and they can either be crushed. So under extreme pressure, you can either become a diamond or you can become
Yeah.
crushed.
No pressure, no diamonds, man. That's the best
Yeah,
phrase ever.
yeah, and I think that's how that's the only way that is logical in my mind to approach things. So it's either, okay, if we've hit a devastating thing and something hasn't gone to plan, okay, are we calling it quits here? Is this it? Are we done?
Mm.
Or are we going to approach this and tackle this? Because we all know we've all got more in the tank. So let's come up with a new game plan and let's tackle this and try again. And ultimately, that's life. Life is a series of failures until you get it right.
That's so true, man. And I think it's awesome now because you can kind of paint the arc. Obviously, we're looking backwards at it. It does have a positive loop up to, worlds and stuff like that, which is now you're kind of past it and you're in the gym. And what does that constructive process look like? Which is, we just had a fluke error. We're going to double down on what we knew worked 8 weeks leading up to it. Or is it like a constructive feedback conversation between Rhys thinks this and you think this, you find a happy medium? Or like, what does that kind of lower rebound arc look like in the year, I guess, between?
I guess I would describe it as a live conversation, that it's not just, okay, we'll have one conversation and then we'll put that to bed. It's a constant thing. Every competition, I debrief. So we do a debrief, we talk about it, we write things down, we come up with ideas. Did things go well? Did they not go well? And we're constantly, both of us, extracting as much as we can from every scenario, so that when the inevitability does come, that there is a big competition, whether that's, we're 2023 now, Olympic qualification starts this year, and then the year after we have Olympic Games. So we need to understand our minds really, really well. And so trying to extract as much information from all of these scenarios is the only way to, in my mind, or the way I'm approaching it anyway, is to get these athletes prepared for that moment, so that there's less risk of anything going wrong, and at least we've covered everything humanly possible in the gym. So just a lot of open talks, and it's certainly just the type of style that I would, coaching style that I would certainly, I don't want to say recommend, but encourage. No, do you know what I would say? I would very much encourage this democratic style of coaching. And ultimately, I think that's a massive cultural change that we've had in sport. I think we're this old style of this autocratic, top-down, cards closed, decisions made without the athlete. That's outdated. I don't think it works anymore. I think we're shifting nicely to this democratic style of coaching where everyone has a say, and it's based on an idea meritocracy where the best idea wins. It's not what coach says, because that just doesn't work. We're not in the army. These are people's careers. These are human beings. They're not just your gymnasts as a coach. They're human beings that are building their own lives, and it's about making sure that you holistically develop them so that they're as well prepared for life as possible. And I think that's, as coaches, that's the best way we can deliver sessions and be as coaches, because we're not just coaches as well. We're human beings. We want to develop, we want to understand. And I think as long as you're hungry for that education of the human condition and the sport as a whole, then why not try and extract as much information as possible? And I think that can only work if it's based on truth, because kids aren't silly. Kids are not stupid. They will sniff you out if they think there's not truth involved here. And you can only fake it till you make it so many times. You know what I mean? You have to understand your craft. Otherwise, you'll just get sniffed out. And the moment that that's broken, and that bond and that trust, because sometimes it will be that the coach has to make a decision. Okay, we're going into a final. 2 of the top dogs have just fallen. We need to make a snap decision that, okay, you don't need to do your big routine. Maybe you need they need to trust you on that. They need to 100% trust you. And it can't just be a coach says. It's democratically done. And okay, how do you feel about this? And that's not just normally done on then and there. You got to practice that. You got to practice that in the gym. Okay, we're doing a control comp. Okay, now you're doing your upgraded routine. Okay, now you're not. And you practice that, those kind of, I think I've went off on a tangent there. But
no, this is amazing. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about, because I love the way we're layering this into it, because one thing that I think you're pointing out that is so important for coaches and parents and gymnasts to hear is that I think the same way I had a conversation with, I'm not going to obviously blow anybody's spot up, but a national team member here, and he was home from college and he comes in for lifting and for whatever, and for arm care and whatever. And I'm like, what's different about freshman, sophomore year at this school versus when you're training on your own? And he was like, I am relentlessly more hyper focused. Every turn is what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What's going on with the skill? And it's very methodical, right? But you're describing the same process for the mental and emotional landscape of someone's mind, of what is going on in my head when it goes well, when it doesn't go well, when my coach says this, when we make a decision. And like that partnered skill set is incredibly important, right? Which is the analysis of yourself and the analysis of what's going on in your head, because you and I know so many people, Luke, that are phenomenal athletes, but they don't have that constructive dialogue, and it just crumbles in on top of them when they really need to have a big moment where they step up, you know? And so I think that's one thing, but also like, it's just blatantly clear to me how well trust and rapport and communication is established in you. And I'm not sure if you've ever thought about this thought experiment, and I have goosebumps right now thinking about this. Imagine if in that moment leading up to those eight weeks or whatever, you had an authoritarian, is that how you say it? Authoritarian? Yeah, there we go. Here we go. Boston accent coming through. But imagine if you were like that classic dictatorship from the 80s and 90s, and you were hard on him the whole time. You're doing what I'm telling you. You're doing these routines. And then that moment happens, and he steps off the platform, and you go, I can't believe you just blew it. Bro, we had a shot. We had a shot, and you let us down. Like, that happened in the 80s and 90s, dude. That stuff happened when people were jawing off behind the scenes when the cameras turned away. Can you imagine what would have happened between you and Rhys and the fissure that would have caused in your relationship? I don't think there'd be a common, a world championships medal on the back end of 2 years later. There's no way that would have happened. No way.
It would have dissolved the respect and trust and relationship then and there. And that's why it's important to act that way. And if I was only focused on Rhys's result and not Rhys as a person, then I think that's the fundamental difference there. Because and that way, again, I think any coach that acts in that way is letting their ego get in the way, and they're thinking, how does this make me look? You've come off, that's made me look bad. That's horrendous for anyone to think.
Insecurity, my man. That is insecurity.
Yeah, well, 100%. Yeah, that insecurity will leak out eventually, and sometimes ego will just blur that right and wrong. And I think that's what we've seen highlighted over the industry as a whole over the last several years, where this old school military style, where I refer to it as autocratic style of coaching, it is completely shifted. Well, not completely shifted. It is majoritively shifted, and there's a lovely conscious feel about the coaching industry in the sport of gymnastics of, okay, that doesn't work anymore. Let's see what we can do. And I think this democratic style, where everyone has a say, we all have an equal vote of say, and let's talk it out. And I love the idea that it's based upon, and it has a foundation of this idea meritocracy, where it's not just, if I have an idea as a coach, I think that this can work. It's the best idea wins. That's the game of the game here. I don't care if my idea is wrong, because ultimately I want you to succeed as a person, because I know how much each individual athlete that I work with puts in, because that's the standard that I hold. And actually, Cal Schufeld writes in his book a really nice chapter. It's called Be Demanding, Not Demeaning. And I think that's a really good way, if you understand it correctly, which it kind of took me a couple times to read it. And it's about, what I've taken from that is, you can have standards. So you can say, right, okay, I want everyone to arrive to training 5 minutes before, so that you're in the mental mindset. I want everyone to be working, their hardest. And I want these certain types of standards. But it doesn't mean you have to be demeaning. It doesn't mean you have to, be this military style coach and it's black and white and it's right or wrong. It can be open discussion. And that's why any program, any routine construction, anything like that is pertaining to the athlete, it's an open discussion from that moment. So I'll constantly be writing down my ideas, and I'll have my blueprints of my programs that I often do, and they're done in 10-day chunks over 8-week period, and there's certain cycles within that, and I'll lay that out. I'll hook my laptop up to the TV, and we'll line up in the gym, and we'll say, right, okay, let's have a wee sit down. Here's the program that I see. So we're preparing for the World Cup series now. Okay, so that program started. And before that program started, 2 days out, well, actually, it was a bit longer than that. I threw it up on the TV and I said, "Here's the program, boys. This is the blueprints. Very rarely it's going to go to plan. Okay, so these numbers on this day might change, and this week might change altogether, and depending on the load. Important thing is that we have an open discussion all the time. So if you haven't slept the night before, I want to know about it, because I don't want you doing a CAS triple twist or on the hard landing if you're sleep deprived or if you're not feeling well or any of these types of things. And I think this autocratic style wouldn't allow for such an open discussion, because gymnasts would be scared to say, because they know the numbers have to be, or coach isn't going to be happy. But this open discussion built on truth and a nice, honest, open relationship, I think, is really the only way to do it. Because, some coaches kid themselves to think, there's a bit of a God complex about them. Well, hold the brakes a second.
Yeah.
You're a coach, you're a gymnastics coach, you can do incredible things, but you're there to help the gymnast. You're not there to make yourself look sweet, post it on Instagram. How many likes can I get? That's not what coaching should be about. And I think that line that was blurred before is becoming a little bit more clear from what I can see anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I've been very fortunate via, luck and timing, and maybe some work, is to be able to rub shoulders and hang out with some very high level national team coaches here in the US and Canada and other places. And there's a very common theme to these athletes that, I think of Ellie Black and Dave, I think of yourself and Rhys, I think of the people down here like Cecile and Simone. I think of these people who are just rocket shipping still in multiple years over and over, that they don't have their fair share of disappointments or struggles, but they continue to get back up, brush themselves off, and keep going. And what you see is, what you're saying is, being able to get to that point of kind of a democratic, more communicative style is, there's a very clear self-awareness that's existent in the coaches, and also maybe somewhat the gymnasts, which is, I'm aware of, me as a human and my style, my tendency, what I think, but also there's a very clear distinction in the coach's self-esteem that is not connected to the athlete and their performance. And I think you said that earlier, which is, if you had said, Rhys, I care about you as a human, but then he bombs and has a tough moment, and then you say, I can't believe you did that. Like, you then have a say-do gap where now all of a sudden, well, it is dependent on his performance and not him as a human, right? And that's the problem that happens. And so the best coaches that I can think of, like yourself and Nick and Cecile and others, they are able to distinguish their own self-esteem as a human without anything related to the athlete. They're sad. Of course, it's competitive. You want to win, but you don't think less of yourself as a coach when Rhys does not as well, and think great of yourself that I'm the best thing ever when he has a great performance, and I think that's really important for people listening to this to resonate and kind of marinate on, because that, without that, what's going to happen in the gym when things hit a sticky point?
100%. And you've hit it there nicely about knowing and understanding yourself. And it's something that I learned maybe in my early 20s, where I started really actively thinking, why am I making this decision? What is leading to me thinking this way? Or, I wasn't a great competitor. I would train very hard in the gym, but in terms of competition, just never pulled it off, always just choked. And that's what kind of started it, that I started thinking, why can I do this in the gym and not in competition? And started kind of reverse engineering it and figuring out, okay, well, this is leading to this, and this emotion here is making me feel this way. And I think that's so important for athletes to understand their own emotions, their own decision making. Because if you can know yourself, I think there's a old saying about, understand the moment that you understand yourself, that's when wisdom begins, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And that's very, very true. I think that's when you can really begin to authentically be yourself, which is so freeing. You don't need to pretend, you don't need to be this or that. And I think that's where you'll see your best competitions and your best outcomes, whether it's in or out of sport, just as a person in relationships, it as simply as doing everyday tasks, you'll just be more yourself, you'll be happier. And I think, isn't that what we all want?
Yeah. And maybe this kind of third leg to the stool that I often think a lot about in my own journey is, it's less common, but oftentimes I think, unfortunately, there is some not baggage, I don't want to say, but there's just stuff going on in a coach's personal life or a parent's personal life where, they're maybe not as happy with their relationships or their lifestyle habits, or something about the way their careers, they're working too much, they're not getting paid enough, their kids are young and they're having stress. So they pull their own kind of frustrations into the gym with them to the athletes sometimes. And I think that's a really important too, which is, I definitely come from a place where I was working too much. And, at that time in my life, when I was 20s, I was definitely, partying a little bit too much, and I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't working out, and I felt like shit, frankly, and I would come into the gym with just a sour mood, and I'd kind of be more snippy and have a short fuse. And it's like, nothing the kids are doing, it's all my fault, and you have to have this ring of accountability. Whereas there are moments, obviously, with young kids where, their choices and their behaviors are probably the source of the frustration, and you have to work on that as a culture. But there's a lot of times I still see in gymnastics where, unfortunately, the personal lives or the health status or the habits that a coach has is not leading them in down a positive way to be objective. And again, I think I speak to what I know about you and many other people that I'm friends with, is you're willing to put in the discipline and the accountability in your own life to take care of yourself. And if you have some personal life drama going on, that's not a place to bring it out in the gym and drag your frustrations out. And that accountability is massively important. Like, if you can get self-aware and have an internal source of self-esteem that doesn't depend on an athlete's performance, and you have accountability to do some hard shit on your own when you need to every day, you're in a really good position to help other people. If you don't have that, how in the world can you have an athlete listen to what you say and give them a positive advantage? And I think a lot about that these days. I watch the landscape kind of terramorph over to a new model, is those people that are really doing the work, man. I have a lot of respect for those people that are really doing the work every day on themselves, so they're better in the gym.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that people that are actively reflective in that manner still can get it wrong. They can still have their bad days. They can still come in and be tired or grumpy. And without a doubt, 2022 taught me that. 2022 was certainly the hardest year of my life so far, for many different reasons. And it taught me a lot about how to deal with it and to express that and to reflect on it. And I would try my hardest. It's something I need to work on still, is if there is something bothering me, I prefer just to try and say it out loud, and just, okay, I come in and the boys line up, and they'll tend to know. We know each other so flipping well now that they can tell by my walk. They'll be like, I think they say, "Oh, there's a tone about you today," as like a joke.
Do they give you the tooth train? They go choo choo.
Yeah. No one's actually pulled that on me yet.
Rhys is gonna do that. He's gonna come out like, my man.
And yeah, I think it's best for, again, built on that trust and honesty and that open relationship, just to say, you know what, yeah, I'm pretty annoyed. Here's what's happening, blah, blah, blah. And then even that alone can disarm it and to help change it. So it's something it's constantly got to be worked on and reflected on. It's not just like a wake up one day and your mindset's changed. It's a long journey to that kind of, I guess you could call it, enlightenment of sorts. If you do finally figure that out, then my goodness, spread the word and teach us all, because
send us the PDF summary, because we'd like to learn.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good place to kind of talk about, which is, you're moving on in your career and you're doing a lot of coach education now. You're talking to a lot of people. And I would agree. I think 5 years ago, if you and I had this conversation, I'd be a little bit more pessimistic about the change in culture and some coaches, actions. Of course, there's still some issues going on and some stuff problem, but it is getting significantly better due to, I think, many great examples like yourself and, again, Dave and Ellie and many others. But also to that point is, I know there's a lot of, coaches who are in a gym somewhere in the middle of, Ireland or USA or Canada who are like, that sounds amazing. I'd love to have a personal style where I don't feel so anxious, and I don't feel like I have to do it as hardcore as I do. And I forget who on the podcast said it, and I'm so sad I can't remember it, but he was saying essentially, if this is the only way, I don't want to do it. He's saying, if this is the only way I can coach is being mean and cruel and yelling, because that's the only way to do it, then I'm not going to do this. And again, it's just going to kill me. I forget what, but he's like, I'm going to give it 2 years of trying this new style that's more of a communication and kind of open-minded. And if in 2 years I can't get anywhere that I want, then I'm just going to hang it up and move on. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, if you have either pearls of wisdom or things to think about for that coach who is, I'm listening to this podcast while I'm on a treadmill right now, and this is hitting a little too hard for me. It's resonating a little bit too deep with me, and I'd like to maybe make some changes. I'd love to kind of give some kind friend advice to that person who's willing to take the first step into self-awareness, but just needs some direction. And I have some thoughts, but I think your expertise is probably a little bit better here.
Well, gosh, I wouldn't say expertise, but I mean, I've spent a lot of time thinking. I'm a critical thinker, and anyone that knows me in and out of the gym, they'll know that I'm a thinker, because sometimes I'll just drift off. and
Yeah.
we'll be in conversation, or I'll be present in a room, but people know mentally I'm not present because I'm deep in thought. I like to problem solve as much as I can. I go to sleep thinking about these types of things. That's how I best actually problem solve, is just before I go to sleep. There's that little
Mhm.
window, and most of my problem solving happens then. And if it's particularly troublesome, I'll dream about it as
Mm,
well. And then I'll wake up and sometimes I'll have the answers from that. But in terms of advice, my advice is to critically think, to
mm,
actively think about it, and not distract yourself all the time. And I think that is one vice that a lot of people that I see day in, day out fall victim for, perhaps,
totally.
is the readily available distractions
Mm,
in everyday life
mm,
nowadays. So I work out. It's therapy to me. I'm
mm,
very keen on it. I do it 5 days a week. And when I look around the gym and I see 90%, maybe more, 95% are on their phones when they're in the gym. That is a distraction. You're not focused on the act, okay? And this is the same for at nighttime, or any time where you are alone, so you don't have the daily distraction. So if you're in work, you're kind of in work mode. If you're in
mm,
the gym, you're kind of in gym mode. And but when you do have that nice time where you've got a nice little lamp on and it's a mellow mood, and you're able to actually think, most people that I see and I know will have their phones out and they'll be scrolling, or they'll be looking at something else. And so that's a distraction to that critical thinking time.
mm,
And one of the things I said to one of my gymnasts after Munich, he was very disappointed. He didn't go through the routine that he wanted to, on floor. And I encouraged him to be okay in silence, and to be all right with sitting in a room without anything happening. It seems to me that people are terrified of that. They're
mm,
terrified of what thinking can happen in that
mm,
silence, and so there's all these distractions that people are really easily able to adhere to.
mm.
And social media is obviously one of them. And
Mm.
social media can be really crappy, really bad for you, or you can use it to your advantage. That's how we communicate. That's how we speak to each other. That's how, there's some amazing positivity that can be
Mhm.
taken from social media. It doesn't necessarily need to be all bad, but in most cases that I see, it's a distraction and it's
Yeah.
mindless scrolling. And so that would be the biggest single bit of advice: is cut the distractions out and actually spend time thinking what is annoying you. So if something comes up that is upsetting or it's triggered you, and you've now got this series of negative emotions. Okay, stop. Try and figure that out. Okay, I sense this emotion is
Mm,
negative, and figure out what was that trigger. If you
mm,
figure that out, you can maybe stop that happening, or at least understand it better. And
mm.
then there begins the journey to understanding what that trigger is, because we've all got triggers no matter what it is.
Yep.
And they can be silly or they can be deep rooted,
Mm.
but understanding that can really help. And then you can just reverse engineer from there and
Yeah.
figure that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think this speaks to a really important point, which is, I agree with you that the lack of negative white space in your life sometimes can be a victim, a problem. You know what I mean? Which is, if you never have a moment, 5, 10, 20 minutes where you're not really actively distracted with something or doing something, you don't really ever have time to kind of peel the hood back and look at what's going on in your thoughts. And you think about, like, maybe the average day of someone is like, they wake up, they grab coffee, they go on their phone, they start scrolling, they got to go to work, they drive to work, they're listening to a podcast or something of their music, they get to the gym, they start doing that, then they're with their kids after and they're kind of distracted, and they come home, they're back on their phone, they grab, it's just like right to TV, right to bed. And there's no blank space there. And I think there's two pieces to this. There's one is that oh, I didn't realize I was doing that. I should make space, and I'm not afraid of looking inside of what's going on. There's that half of it. But there's another half, which is I'm intentionally escaping and numbing and running away from this because I'm scared of what's up top. And I think that's where some of the circling the drain starts to happen, is if you can actually plan 5, 10, 15 minutes and some things start to pop up that make your stomach, not feel so awesome about what's going on in my head. Why do I think this? I don't like the way I feel, something like that. And my relationship is not working out, or my job situation, or my health is not where I want it to be. And that's really, I'm scared to look at that because it's a reality. I think that's where the tube starts to get a little bit more important. And whether you're going to do that on your own, or you're going to write down those thoughts and burn them like I do, or you're going to go to a therapist like I did for a long time, like those things are vitally important, because for me in my coaching career, and I've told this story before, is when I realized that, why am I yelling at 13-year-old girls? Like what in the world makes me have to yell at somebody? Unless it's like a safety hazard, right? Like don't run the vault runway. But like, why do I need to yell at a 13-year-old girl? What is wrong right now? And you get that back. It's like, oh, okay. I'm depending on their success because I'm insecure about my coaching. I'm insecure about me as a person. And it goes layers and layers around the negative core beliefs I had about myself, about, my perspective on the world and stuff. So obviously I'm not going to go through my therapy sessions, but it dug down to a lot of layers. When I got to the bottom of it at the basement level, and I worked on that, when I came back out the other side and had healthier coping mechanisms, I was no longer in the slightest bit feeling like I needed to yell at the girls. I remember that one day, I'm never yelling ever again. And it's been like 7 or 8 years since I've even raised my voice in the slightest bit. So I think that's where people need to spend some time with, which is, if it's an issue at a root level, it's only going to get more amplified in how much it's distracting you and being uncomfortable. And you have to do that work, man. You really do have to do that work, as hard as it is.
Yeah, it can be uncomfortable at times, but a massive thing that I remember hearing, I think Tony Robbins talks about it, where he said that the majority of emotions felt on a average day are negative.
Mm.
And when you think about it like that, that means the majority of your life
interesting
is felt with negative emotions, and your perspective can change that. So and having a better understanding of why you're feeling those types of ways. So maybe 2 out of the 20 emotions you feel in a day have been negative because somebody cut you off on a car, or your coffee had too much cream in it. Okay. Now, if you can rationalize them and say, that's ridiculous, I shouldn't feel annoyed about that. Or time, for some reason, time really controls me. And I've tried a new thing recently, which maybe people will find it helpful or not, that when you are able to be off, so you've got a day off, don't look at the time. Don't be controlled by the time.
Yeah.
Quite often we're in this work environment, and if you're pragmatic and you're working hard, then everything's, you're scheduled, and you've got to be here on this time, you've got a meeting at this time, and you've got to do X, Y, and Z. But if you can kind of just escape those boundaries of time, then it can free up your thinking a little bit. And I think that's when I'm most creative. And you feel it a lot on holiday. If you ever go to holiday, you're sitting on a sun lounger, you're not caring about the time, you're not caring about a meeting here or there, and then all of a sudden you start feeling happier. You're kind of in a more creative mood, and then all of a sudden then you're starting buzzing with lots of positive ideas. That's an incredible feeling. So if we can try and, for me personally, I can speak about, I've actively tried to get that feeling of being on a sun lounger in Spain in my everyday life, because no one knows when life is going to finish. And so I want to at least be as happy as I can in the intervening time in a happy way. So I guess that's a bit of a tangent from the advice. Well,
no,
I guess good. Listening to good people as well, because you can hear a lot of crap throughout the day. Yeah. You turn on the news, it's negativity. You look on social media and news, it's negativity. And there's a lot of negativity that you can absorb if that's what you're setting your day up to. But if you switch that around and you don't watch that stuff, and you don't listen to that negativity, and you follow people that are inspirational and doing amazing things, and maybe it's a 10-second quote that you listen to in the day at the morning. But if you follow the right people on social media, for example, if you do scroll in the morning as you're having your coffee, well, then at least maybe it's something positive. So there's a slight, small little change that, you're not just cutting social media out, going cold turkey, but at least you can gain knowledge and information and inspiration from those types of conversations. So listening and speaking to people that are wiser than you can help.
I agree, man. I agree so much. It resonates a lot. And I think my last piece of maybe parting advice, which I've seen has been true in you and many other people, is there's an equal need to accountability for yourself and what your choices are. Because no one's going to make you work out. No one's going to make you eat well. No one's going to make you drink water. Nobody's going to do that. But the other side is yes, you need to spend your time with positive people who you really are going to be inspired by and who believe you. So for me personally, it was taking maybe 4 or 5 people in my life who just tend to sometimes skew negative and just spend less time with them. But then also at the same time is myself is okay, I have I know there's a set amount of things I have to do every day to stay healthy and to keep my mental bandwidth, in check. And I mean, for half my day, I deal with people who are in pain, right? They have had surgery, they're gymnasts that are really frustrated, they're upset, they're not competing. So I need a lot of emotional tolerance, especially when I was coaching a lot more. That's just like the most is required sometimes. And so I know every morning if I wake up and I've had 8 hours of sleep, I hop right in a cold shower, I drink, a glass of water and get some vitamins, I work out, I do my own journaling and meditation, and I get like whatever that first work task on my life I have to do is there. As soon as I get there and I get all that done, it's like 8 o'clock, right? 8 o'clock. And I'm like, I've dominated all the things that I need for myself. And then I turn my phone on and look at my business stuff or look at my emails or whatever. And I would challenge people to use that domino effect. The Atomic Habits book calls it habit stacking. So like if I could just sit up out of bed and put my feet in the floor, if I could just get to the shower, if I could just drink a glass, it's just like, and then by, 20, 30 minutes go in and you're cruising and you have a lot more bandwidth to kind of work with. So yeah, that would be what's been the most helpful for me has been trying to be a little accountable with my own health.
Yeah, for sure. Those little small steps. I saw a cool picture, which was a ladder, a really tall ladder, and a stick man that was climbing up, and it had hundreds of little steps.
Mm.
And then a ladder to the right of it, which had maybe only 5 steps of this massive ladder, but they couldn't get onto the first.
I love that.
And so these little steps is how you make these wonderful big changes. And it was a visual representation that just beautifully described what you've just said.
Yeah. There. So I think that's a really good kind of like, again, friendly advice. If we were sitting with someone like, hey, listen, like we got to do some changes here. I think that makes a lot of sense for the person who is self-aware and wants to change themselves and wants to take the leap. But I think a lot of people, the tension that I feel from some DMs and emails is, listen, I'm on board and I don't want to work in a gym that's super stressful. And I don't want to be around the really intense coaching anymore from particularly optional and elite programs that reach out to me. And I think next I'd like to shift the conversation and talk about what do you do when you're in a situation where you're the one who's really on board, but your maybe coworker or the gym you work in or something like that is maybe not as on board with new ideas and self-development and trying to lift weights and trying to do all these new things that have been coming out, and they feel as though they're kind of like a rat stuck in a little bit of a maze there. I'm not sure if you have perspective on this at all.
Well, if you throw facts around, then it tends to help because it's nice to have factual evidence to support everything you're saying. And ultimately, if the environment that you're in isn't nurturing you, then maybe that environment needs to change. And that's not always an option, a viable option. But if you're really not happy and nothing's changing and you're trying every strategy that you can to change a certain situation and it's still not changing, then perhaps that new environment is one way just to totally rejuvenate you and to bring forward those ideas to someone else that will listen. But it's hard to motivate other people because motivation to me is intrinsic. And if self-motivation is so powerful, if someone is self-motivated, they can do a lot. They can create a
positive
lot.
Social contagion, it spreads like wildfire when one person's changing a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. That you walk past someone and someone says hello, and then they walk on. You're kind of like, oh, that was nice. And then you're like, oh, I want to do that, and you walk past someone else and say hello, and they're like,
yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, so it's
on the factual thing, you just jogged my memory, and I to Luke's defense, I did not tell him I was going to pull this up, but there's actually a crazy article in the British Journal of Sports Medicine I wanted to show. And this was an elite soccer clubs and football clubs. And essentially they took the most elite teams for soccer, for football, European football, and they separated them based on coaches who are more of what you're saying, which is like a transformative style, open communication, very democratic, very meritocracy, about like everybody's here in this towards a common goal. And they separated those from the coaches that are very old school, very hardcore. You do what I say all the time. And this study, obviously it's a little biased because they use the medical providers as the proxy for like what coach falls into what category. But long story short is this study showed that those coaches that were much more hardcore, much more authoritarian, they had a higher risk, not a rate, a risk of injury and more athletes missing practice and more athletes who are out for longer periods of time with injuries versus in the group and that was much more democratic, communicative. They had a lower risk of injury and a lower rate of injury, as well as a lower time missed from practice and a better competitive standing. So like for those that are looking for like maybe some more, meat on the bones of what you can present to somebody or like is actually helpful, is like, this is the first study I've ever seen, because this is a BJSM is a very high gold standard, like orthopedic medicine journal. And they talk about like tendonitis and fractures and that stuff. It's rarely they dance on the category of like, philosophical and stuff like this. But this came out in 2018, and it forever changed the way that I view this conversation because of that, So yeah, I want to share that with you, but also the listeners.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
The tangents continue. Yes. And I would agree with what you said too, which is, if you can do your best to be a positive social contagion and stick to your guns and try to change things, it does actually have a positive effect. And we noticed that in our gym when we were all trying to make a positive swing. Is like one person starts to work out a little bit more before practice and comes in and like, or we used to work out with the girls once a week. And that was very, very powerful to our culture, to like me doing sled pushes, dying with the girls too. And I think every little bit like that, the first time someone doesn't yell and they instead have a conversation and somebody else notices that, or the girls notice that, right? That spreads very positively. And I'll just kind of jump on the grenade a little bit, which is if you go out of your way to change and nobody else, you should talk to the head coach. You should talk to the gym owner and sit them down and like, listen, I'm just telling you, man, the injury rates are out of control. Nobody really enjoys working here. This is frustrating. Like, we really need something to change. And then that can change from a top-down level, and they can help. My boss, Eva, was extremely helpful for weeding out some of the people who were clearly just there to get a paycheck and didn't care about more than just the transactional in and out. And some people were like, oh, like that's just the reality of working in a business. But the 95% of people were on board, wanted to change too. Then if you go to your head coach and your gym owner and all the way up and nobody wants to change anything, oh my God, start Google searching for new gyms. Man, there are so many gyms out there that are good people and they really care about you and about the kids and about what you want to do. And you spend a third of your life working, if not in gymnastics, probably 40%, because we're so overzealous that it is not worth your mental health to be miserable for 40% of your life because your work environment blows, just frankly.
100%. And I've been there, I've done that. And it's very difficult in that situation because it can turn toxic very quickly. So you got to be resilient and prepared for that. That because some people just don't want to change, unfortunately. And okay, it's not everyone's individual job to try and force people to change. You can help as much as you can, but if they're not willing to listen and to do those types of things, if you're in a position where they should be listening, then get out of there, because if you're good and you're hardworking, you'll get a job.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And there's kind of two more extension topics. I mean, I could literally sit here for 6 hours even talk about this, but there's two more extension topics that come up here. One of which being is like motivation, right? And obviously I think you work with a very high level athletes who are super motivated, but I feel like along your path and career, you've probably experienced your fair share of, 12, 13, 15, 13-year-old boys are an interesting species. You know what I mean? In terms of attention span and motivation sometimes. And I feel like the palpable feeling I feel from some coaches is like, it's me and 10 girls or guys that are young, and the motivation is just brutal sometimes. And I'm not sure if you have advice on maybe what frustrated and or, kind of feeling a little burnt out coaches can think about for a group of people who are struggling a little bit to kind of get the gears going and like really do the drills and really commit to the routines and the conditioning and stuff like that. 'Cause I feel like that's a big source of wonderful coaches who just don't have the tools to deal with some chaos in the practice training environment with younger athletes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess, those truth train types of moments, then actually just says pull up to the gym.
I hope that Becky, our editor, makes a cool little train with you on it for one of our graphics. Like, that has to come out on social media. I apologize in advance, but sorry, go ahead.
I think tackling it
Yeah.
straight on, like those moments where the truth train rolls up, they can be incredibly powerful, and that can be the change, and things then can precipitously change from that moment, because just exposing it and just saying, here, okay, right, we're sitting down as a group now, you've got your 10 youngers in front of you, and you just say, you guys are draining me. It's not fun to be here, and here's why. I'm coming in, and it's a struggle to get you to focus on just holding your straddle fold. Or I know that you're not doing those numbers, or when you're on trampoline doing those timers, you're not focusing, you're not having conscious training. And here's the pitfalls that you're falling for. You're wasting your own time, and ultimately then you're wasting my time, because I'm here to try and better everybody. I'm trying to better each one of you that as much as I can, because I've got a particular set of skills that I can do that. I'm willing to do that. So let's work with me. If you want to resist me and you want to push back, okay. I don't mind pushing back if it's in an inquisitive manner, because I love that. In fact, I love when people actually ask questions like, why? Why doesn't need to be a problem unless you have an ego. It's like, oh, why you're questioning me? You silly boy. No, it should be okay. That's good, because that person is trying to figure something out. So why do we need to do leg lifts in our core conditioning? Okay, well, here's why, because it does your hip flexors, it does leg tension, it
I want
does
a peach, man.
yeah, exactly right. And then you can start educating them. What's that? Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and they learn.
Yep.
Yeah.
Something like
So,
that. Yeah.
you know, so a situation like that is quite a good example of that. If you're just trying to get them to be motivated. And you know what? You're not always going to win everyone over. And that's the reality of it as well, is that sometimes there's just people aren't cut out for it. And so if it depending on your role and your position at that time, maybe it's about separating them into 2 groups or 3 groups. And that can be difficult. And believe you me, that can be a turning time for the parents more than anyone else if you start splitting them up. But eventually that has to happen, because you might have a select few that really are they're grinding and they're working hard and they're producing amazing gymnastics. And then you might have within that, you know, 3 or 4 that probably won't make it, because you can tell quite early on whether someone certainly has the potential or not potential. And sometimes when they're struggling, then misery loves company, and they just want to distract everyone, and they want to kind of just have a bit of a laugh. And we can always have a laugh, but there will be times where you need to work hard. And when that balance becomes undone, then something needs addressed. And so perhaps splitting the group up. So if it's 10, you maybe split into 5 or 6 and 4, and then you have certain motives with each group, and then you can extract the best out of them.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think to the former of your point is that was very true for me too, which is sometimes the girls that I was coaching would be like, man, you're in a bad mood today. Or like, what's going on with you? Like, why are you so upset? And I'm like, that's, you know, maybe it's something I need to work on, but let me just have a moment of honesty with you, which is like, you know, how do you think I feel when I spend an hour before practice making drill circuits and coming up with these really, like, I'm doing research online. I'm trying to create these things to make you reach the goals that you told me are important. And when I give them to you, you kind of do them and you skip one over there. And then you're kind of in the chalk bucket, you know, like that doesn't really make me feel like I'm putting my effort and my time into something when I just came from another job. Right. And I'm really doing this out of like the goodness of what I want to help you guys. And it actually is, again, it's not yelling. You know, I thought like back to me, when my dad was disappointed in me, it hurt worse than when he yelled at me. You know, he'd be like, oh, I thought I raised you better than that. I was like, oh God, Dad.
Oh, yeah. That was
like, Jesus, Dad, you got me. But he never raised his voice. He's like, oh, it's interesting that you would do that with your friends. I thought I raised you better than that. But what's for dinner? And I was like, oh,
yeah.
Obviously not that cruel, but like when you go to the girls like that, or the young boys like that, and you're like, yeah, you know, I spend a lot of time trying to make these drills, and I really care about your gymnastics, but it seems like you're just not really doing it. Like sometimes that's more sticky and resonant, even for a younger athlete. They understand that. So that honesty and communication is really important. And then to the latter, which is say that lands for 9, but one is just not even on the same planet as everybody else. Eva was very good with talking to these athletes of first calling them over and being like, hey, listen, like, are you okay? Like starting that conversation with empathy and starting that conversation with like, you're usually focused and you're usually like got a lot going on. Like, are you okay? Because it seems like you're really distracted right now. And like, unfortunately, it's a safety thing when you're talking to somebody before they take their turn. And that usually was like, opens the door for me. Like, you know what, I just like, I didn't sleep last night and I got in a fight with my girlfriend or boyfriend or something comes up and like, okay, that's okay. But like, you're allowed to have that, you can't be, distracted. You can't be not focused on what we're doing, because we have a set of cultural guidelines we follow here that when we're here, we can have fun, but we're working hard, and going through those layers sometimes really helps. And then, I mean, Eva's definitely told some people like, listen, you're just not here right now. And it's not happening today. And like, we're going to have to take a break aside or go do another assignment, or like your parents are going to come pick you up, because this is not safe right now for you to be doing Tkachevs when you're frustrated or upset or tired. So we're just going to chalk it up. You'll come back tomorrow and it's all good. No harm. They walk in the door the next day and like you greet them with a smile and you say like, hey, how we feeling today? Like it's not bad juju or anything. It's just fresh start. And obviously continual problems. There's a different conversation. But I think that kind of like 4-foot empathetic led person helping view versus like, get over there and do your drills. Like you're always goofing off, like very different communication styles. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And ultimately we have as adults, we have the hindsight of knowing what it was like to be a teenager. And I don't know what you were like as a teenager, but I was pretty crazy, and there was a lot of there was so much emotions, and these teenagers, these kids are just trying to figure themselves out. So how they're expressing themselves may not be how they actually feel. They may be obsessed with gymnastics and love gymnastics and have all the potential in the world, but maybe they're expressing themselves slightly differently because someone said something at school, or they're just filled with
Yeah.
emotions, and that's that. So it's, I
Yeah.
think everything should be kind of under, from an adult's point of view, that you should always remember they're growing, and there's so
Mhm.
much going on. So,
Yeah.
take everything with a pinch of salt. Even if they are salty with you one day and they are pushing back and or whatever, then it's like, okay, why? There has to be
Yeah.
a reason.
Sure. Yeah, and I think we've kind of coasted through a lot of really awesome topics. The last one, I think we handled disappointment quite well in the beginning, and I think the last one I just like to maybe give some advice on is people who are dealing with some either competition anxiety and or just mental strain of that whole pressure situation, because obviously you have operated on the world stage and had wonderful moments and more frustrating moments, and I think I'm just curious if you have advice to people on handling some of those, just not the good or the bad, but just like the pressure of it all. You know what I mean? Like what I don't personally have any experience beyond like a national level competition. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
And do you mean from a coach's point of view?
Yeah, maybe coaches. Yeah, coaches. I think the primary listeners will be coaches. So yeah, let's go that angle.
So from a coaching point of view, you're going to have all these external pressures and internal pressures. So you're going to have certain outcomes that you want from a competition, for example, and there are variables that can affect that. But you're also going to have external ones. So I'm a national coach, so I work for a company that's a governing body that works for essentially the government, because
Yeah.
government then
Yep.
produce goals, and
Yep.
then they deal with the funding for all that. So there's certain KPIs that we need to hit.
Yep.
And so you have to think of those types of things, but then you also have a certain set of standards that you want to achieve. So, for example, whether it's a European Championships or World Championships or Olympic Games, you're going to just want a clean routine, and that's essentially what you're dealing with as a coach. And so, what can affect those clean routines and a happy, safe competition? And I guess how to deal with them is, I have found, to not, gosh, it might sound counterintuitive, but to not take the end result so seriously. It's not life and death.
Mm.
Whether this goes to plan or not, it's not life and death. And sometimes all of that anxiety can totally blur the experience of that moment, because
Mm.
you look at some coaches that get to travel the world, they get to experience all these different cultures, but they're letting the anxiety of the outcome of the competition completely ruin it.
Mm.
Where they're not there, they're not present, they're not experiencing life for what it is, which is an amazing thing, good or bad of the outcome. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, we all want the positive outcome. We want the happy ending. We can romanticize it as much as we want, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And the acceptance of understanding that sometimes it
Mm.
just doesn't go to plan can be so relieving. And to think, okay, well, that's all right, but I'm going to do everything that I can within my
Mm.
power to mitigate the risks of these variables that can affect the outcome. So
Mm.
I'm going to make sure that everyone is happy at morning. We'll have a little meeting at breakfast, and I'll just be making sure. Okay, right, guys, if we all drank enough water, did everyone sleep all right? Does anyone need anything? What time's physio? And
Mm.
have a positive, upbeat aspect about those types of dialogues with them, and then that can kind of just, well, you can figure it out. So you're doing as good of a job as you can. And then when it comes to, you're going to the gym, you've got the travel, and have a bit of a laugh. I'll stick a speaker up on
Yeah.
the when we're traveling to and from, and I'll blast some Michael Jackson, because it just gets the people going. You know what I mean? And so you can create an atmosphere that's built on positivity, because I think a
Mm.
happy gymnast is going to compete better, and a happy
Absolutely.
coach is going to coach better.
Mm.
As it's probably not answering your question all that much, but
No,
to
you
try
are.
to be
Yeah, you are.
as chilled as possible is really going to help. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about, of understanding, okay, why are you so anxious about this outcome? I've been at competitions. I can remember 2016 Junior European Championships, and I swear to you, I was close to going into cardiac arrest. I I remember my chest was going insane. It was the first big moment. I knew Rhys had a very good chance of getting a medal. It had never been done before. And he was training well. And I remember, like, I wasn't sure whether I was going to stay conscious.
Mm,
And now looking back on it through experience and understanding, I'd be fine going to junior Europeans and experiencing all of that through, because I was more nervous in that competition than I was in Olympic Games.
mm,
So thankfully, due to reflection and figuring things out and my own emotions, I've been able to handle that. Not always, don't get me wrong. I'm still nervous, but
yeah.
in a good way, where it's like my
Excitement.
blinkers are on and I'm just
Yeah.
100%. That's what my nerves look like now, is that I'm focused on one thing and one thing only, and nothing else matters. But that doesn't need to be a negative thing. That can be a really positive thing, because it's you switching everything on. You
Mm,
know, everything's revved up to try and find every answer possible to problem solve anything that's thrown that day. Uh,
mm,
and quite often for me, a big anxiety of competition is making sure everything counts in a routine. You know, the
yeah.
COP is hard enough to understand as it is. Never mind when you have like 3 minutes to write it down coherently and then take on an entire panel of judges that are internationally renowned. You got to tell them, actually, I think something's wrong here.
Mm,
So part of my focus on competition days is, okay, right, that's front support. Okay, quarter turn.
yeah.
Okay, that counts. Okay. And it's like, once I see the positions that make an element count and what
Mm,
allows that, then I can relax a bit. So when I watch a routine, I'm not watching it like just
yeah.
looking for aesthetic errors. I'm looking to see what counts from a D point of view, because
Correct.
obviously, unfortunately, the way things are, we can't argue E,
Yeah.
whether that's right or wrong at times, but the D we can. And so a lot of my anxiety or nerves are focused in and around that moment, because, like I said, the rules are you've got until the next competitor
Mm.
goes, write that down, and then you got to take on those panel of judges. But I guess that's maybe
Yeah,
my
no, it's great, man. I think it's a wonderful way to kind of wrap these things up. And I would agree with you. I have a very resonant, similar situation of, I would always get really, really nervous around bigger competitions because I knew of how much there's been work on the front side of it to get to that point. And I remember like 5 or 6 years ago, we had our first athlete like qualify for like nationals, like at a real stage out of our gym. And it was a big deal. She'd worked super hard. It was a good look for colleges and all that kind of stuff. And I remember almost dry heaving in the bathroom, because it was just me and her and my other coach that I was working with. And she was the only athlete that qualified to the pre-qualifications to make it to nationals. And she had trained 4 years and really wanted it. And she was so excited. And I just remember being terrified, terrified that it wasn't going to go, like you said, the way that it should for her hard work. And because looking at her scores and looking at her routine construction and whatever else, is not that I look at the other field, but I just knew she was very competitive on a couple of events. I'm like, this should be, if we do what we do every day, this should be fine. You know what I mean? But like, God, I was dying, and I think for myself and the other coaches that we worked through was on the other side of it was understanding what you said, which is what is within our control and what is not. And have we done everything we've possibly tried to do to maximize the things within our control and then let go of the things that are not in our control? You know what I mean? Like the rotation schedule, the way it comes out, the judges sitting there for 39 minutes trying to get the first person ahead while we sit there with cold feet, like all that stuff out of our control. But, I think we had peace of mind knowing, and she did, it was a happy story. She did make it, but we had agreed upon before the meet, if it all went to hell and it was just the worst case scenario, we know that the moments leading up to that, we did everything we thought we possibly could within our control, and we could live with that peace of mind. And I think that's probably a really good kind of just bow to tie on this conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the nice thing about that is that means like those reactions mean that you cared, and that's
Yeah.
a really great place to start as a coach. Because if you care, then ultimately you're going to want to do the best for that athlete. And as long as you under the premise that we've talked about of these coaching styles, then that really can maximize potential. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do here as coaches. We're trying to maximize potential. It doesn't matter. Some people will go to Olympics, some people will just learn a cartwheel, but the moment that they learn a new skill and you see the face of that person when
Yeah.
they've learned a new skill, whether it's a triple back or a standing tuck, it's outrageously good. And
Yeah.
that's an excellent thing that we can do as coaches.
Sure, man. I couldn't agree more. And yeah, we'll wrap it up here because I know we got busy schedules, stuff to do. But when this comes out, I think it will be known that you are now going to speak at the symposium. So we are excited to have you. And I know, shocker, you actually are very good at coaching gymnastics, and that's what you'll be talking about more so than this. Although who knows, maybe we're going to do on this too. But I think you'll be giving some very helpful pommel lectures. Correct? Is that where we settled on? I think.
Yeah, just understanding pommels and just kind of what's worked for me, and see if I can help other coaches, because maybe there's talent out there that we can help kind of give some direction to.
Yeah, and it's pretty much a guarantee that if you listen to his lecture, you will have someone of Rhys's caliber, right? That's an automatic 1-to-1.
Well, I've been very blessed, and he's very, very talented. But
Just kidding.
yes, we can see where it goes. I'm excited to do it, and I'm excited that yeah, it's a nice challenge. I haven't done many of them, so it'll be fun.
It'll be fun, man. I think we're got a couple more bricks to lay on the final lineup, but I think we got a pretty monster mag lineup for speakers, which I'm really excited about, because I think sometimes, no disservice, but sometimes I think mag gets like the dark corner on the side of the conference, and it's like 6 people in the room. But I'm excited to have a virtual event where we can pull in some really talented speakers who have really great experience and are internationally renowned for everything. So I'm really excited to kind of get a really cool lineup of people.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right, man. Thank you for your time. I think this was a wonderful conversation that people will really enjoy, similar to our last one. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much, and I'll speak soon.
Cheers.